Hello everyone, welcome to the ITSS Verona Member Series podcast section of Human Rights. We are Arianna and Diletta, and today we're glad to have with us Silvia Battaglia to discuss on the ongoing humanitarian crisis in Yemen. Silvia Battaglia is a freelance journalist who lives between Italy and Yemen. She has worked in Middle Eastern conflict zones and has documented from difficult environments about human rights issues, terrorism, criminality, to mention a few. Welcome, Silvia, and thank you for joining us today.
Thank you very much for your invitation. Nice meeting you.
Thank you. And as we know, almost 250,000 people have died in Yemen's war, and thousands of civilians have been killed or injured. And many people have also been forced to flee their homes due to this conflict that involves mainly the Houthi faction in the northern area and the governmental faction in the south. And the war in Yemen has turned the country into the world's largest humanitarian crisis and the world's worst food security crisis, with 20 million people requiring food assistance. And as such, our first question is on the access of the humanitarian assistance in Yemen. And can you tell us how does the humanitarian access in the context of Yemen work? And are humanitarian organizations able to provide assistance and protection to people in need, especially considering the problems related to COVID-19?
Yes, of course. The humanitarian help to Yemen and the access is submitted to the borders restrictions. That's the first thing to know. That means that ports and airports, not all the ports and airports are open to the access of medical needs or food or whatever. And so humanitarian aid basically gets into the country only through the port of Aden. And sometimes also through the border of Siyun, which is another airport functioning. But both places are in the south of the country. While in the north, the humanitarian aid reaches Sana'a time to time, so the north, which is controlled by Houthis, but can't reach the port of Odeida in the north, which is interested by a blocking since more than 3 years. So the ongoing situation faces on the ground many obstacles and difficulties. The first one are the large numbers of checkpoints in all the area of the country. Checkpoints who are controlled by different factions who are fighting, or if they are not fighting, they are controlling borders or areas. Just to give you an example, the area of Abiyan since years is under the control of Al-Qaeda, but if you go in the area of Rada, part of the city is under the control of Houthis, but it's not so far from the governative control. And actually the area of Marib was until now in the hands of the government, the central government, so the Hadi government. Now is becoming a battlefield. A lot of people are losing their lives, and we are seeing a lot of displaced people going from the areas who were controlled before by the central government to the areas now are under the Houthis' control. Every checkpoint means so that humanitarian aid can wait a long time, hours or days, even months in some cases. And when a truck passes by, and this is applied also to the commercial exchange, they're also submitted to bribes. Bribes from the people, the single people who are in control at that moment, at the time. So we have to consider that many humanitarian aids in these 6 months of war disappeared, or for example, if you have flare or other kind of food, they were left in some places and became rotten. That's why at the international level, many countries decided to do not give again humanitarian aids, or reducing their participation to the humanitarian aids for Yemen. And that's what happened in the last conference, United Nations, where some nations decide to reduce their participations, and others, they decided to send the aid only to the south of Yemen. So actually, with this large crisis in the center of the country, in Mareb, we are seeing already, and in potential would be many more in the future. We are seeing a lot of displaced people that don't have access to food, people that don't have access to humanitarian aid. Regarding the current crisis, well, it's very difficult to say something about Yemen. Like all the countries in war, people suffer before COVID-19 from so many diseases. Sometimes our diseases not so different from COVID-19 in terms of the symptoms. So if there's somebody who has a very strong fever and dies after 2 days, even doctors, they don't know exactly if this person had COVID-19 or not. We saw at the beginning of the pandemic a lot of, we can say, fear regarding coronavirus, and so, but the fear was not about the coronavirus itself, but it was a feeling of doctors and people working in the hospitals. They were sure not be able to give the help to the patients, and they had the fear of being to contracting the coronavirus inside the hospitals, because the patients were coming to the hospitals. But in any case, COVID-19 didn't have a very strong impact on the country, because it's a country blocked from outside. So very few people got coronavirus, especially in the south, and they don't pass the pandemic to others. We have to consider also that not all the authorities have the measure the impact of coronavirus on the population. So we don't have an exact number of how many people had the COVID-19 and how many people died because of COVID-19.
Okay, thank you very much, Laura. Silvia. Now the next question is about journalism. Considering that the various parties to the conflict control the media, how is the condition of journalists in Yemen?
Condition of journalists in Yemen is very bad.
Local journalists, yeah.
It's very, very bad, because journalism is considered a weapon in the war. So there's no idea of independent journalism. If you do journalism, you belong to some of the factions in war. And so if you are working as a fixer for foreigners, you can be considered as an enemy as well, because the idea of spreading some news inside the country could be considered dangerous by the factions in war, and not only by the factions in war at the local level, even at the regional level. Giving you some examples, we can consider that a large number of journalists died during clashes or during air bombardments at the beginning of the war. But many were arrested because they were considered spies by one of the factions, spies of the other faction. That's what happened in the north with a large group of journalists who were belonging at the beginning the Muslim Brotherhood. So they were close to the central government. They were arrested by Houthis, and they are still in jail, and they can't have access to the lawyers. We don't know what will be their fate. Maybe they will be killed, they will be hanged. We don't know, but because also the state of the trials is very unpredictable, and there are no fair trials. But if you consider also other situations in the south, for example, was the case of one of the best fixers for foreign journalists in the south, that he worked for foreign media in a very important documentary about secret prisons for migrants in the area of Mukalla. These prisons, like the prisons in Libya, are controlled by militias close to United Emirates. I'm saying like in Libya because the conditions of the migrants there are harsh, it's very difficult. And when the report was released, the fixer was arrested for 3 months, and we pushed a lot the authorities, and we pushed a lot the international diplomacy to get him out from jail. And the accusations was terrorism, because anything you do and you say against the people who are ruling at the moment the state is considered terrorism in most of the Arab countries. In the specific case, the problem is the fact that half of the government of the south is becoming government close to United Emirates. I'm talking about the Southern Transitional Government, who actually is linked to the central government of Mansour Hadi. So they created a new government, which is a mixture of the ministers of the previous government and new ministers who are belonging to some tribes who are supported by United Emirates, and they support Emirates. So when the report was released, was considered ashamed, and he paid the price. And at the end, after 3 months, he got out of jail, and he had to disappear and brings his family out of the country. So most of the local journalists are really brave, or actually they are dead, or they were relocated by CPJ or Sans Frontières in other Arab countries to save their lives and the life of their relatives.
I understand. And what about foreign reporters? What's the biggest challenge you face when you go to Yemen as a foreign reporter?
Well, I'm a foreign reporter, but at the same time, having a double nationality, I'm as well as a local. Okay. So that's a big difference in my case. So that's why I had access many times and in different forms and ways. But the problem for foreign journalists is they can't have access simply to the country. The central government doesn't release any more visas. And as you know, the government of the north is different because the north is ruled by Houthis. So to get to the north, you need to have a special visa and issued by the authorities of the north. But the authorities of the north are not recognized internationally. So you have to pass by the south to reach the north. So what is happening? It's pretty interesting because it's what's happened in the economy of the war. Some journalists pay a lot of money, but really a lot of money to smugglers to pass by the borders between Oman and Yemen. And from there, they are smuggled by people who are linked with the Houthi militias of the north. So they go directly in cars, and the central government doesn't know that they are around as a journalist because they have a fake touristic visa. And then they get into the north. In the north, they are escorted by Houthi authorities, and they follow what the Houthis want. So the question right now is it convenient going to Yemen? In economic terms for media, no, because the price to enter and to have this trip is $7,000 per person. So if you consider this is, how much is it, and basically you are giving this money to smugglers plus to militias, well, you are fueling their war. So from my ethical point of view, this is absolutely insane, and it's something that it's not good to do. So actually doing also an independent coverage of Yemen, it's extremely difficult due to these reasons.
Thank you very much for your insights, Laura Silvia. And just one last question. What about the conditions of women in the current crisis? And has violence against women increased over the last years?
Well, the case of women, it's pretty interesting. Women, differently than Afghanistan, as we see, are still going to school, they're going to university, etc. But the problem is, with the war, we can say that we have two different situations. One is that we are seeing women that, because their husbands or relatives are going to war, they are taking their jobs and they are doing something that before was pretty unlikely for women. For example, working as a mechanic, repairing cars, opening shops of electric materials, working as a pumps, which is something that never happened in Yemen. And this is possible because men are not around. Yemen is a country where women still can drive, they can work as doctor, employees, etc. So it's not like Saudi Arabia, and never was from this point of view like Afghanistan. So this is important to take in consideration. But things are changing. Things are changing because if militias take advantage, they take advantage with their own view and your way of thinking women, which is women have to stay home. They can be only mothers, or at least they can have education until they get pregnant, or of course, they marry. So we are seeing, of course, more early marriages than before, because if they don't go to school, they marry before, especially in the countryside, especially in poor families. And also because the marriage brings money to the family. If you marry someone, more or less you have back $1,000. With $1,000 you can live, a family can live for 1 year in the war. So we are seeing many families that, they married their teenager girls because of this reason. On the other hand, we are also seeing more restrictions on women in the north and the south, where the areas where militias are, like Mukalla, where the militias are Salafis or Taids, or in the north where militias are Houthis. And for the first time, we are seeing militias doing raids inside the shops in the city because they don't want the people who have shops have women employees. For example, in the restaurants, that is something that we never saw before. Women work in the restaurants as waitress or doing something, and now they can't, because militias will find the owners of the restaurants. There is a very famous case in the north of a beautiful woman, Intisar, which is a model. She was arrested by Houthi militias because she started doing selfies on Instagram, not veiled or with the contact lens in her eyes, and her case, because she was kidnapped, but at the end, this kidnapping was kind of an arrest by the authorities of the north, is considered a warning for young women to do not show herself close to the secular model. So we are seeing actually something a little bit closer to what Taliban are doing in Afghanistan. It's just the beginning, unfortunately.
Okay, thank you very much, Laura Silvia, for all your insightful answers. It was very interesting, and It was a pleasure to having you here for this episode of ITSS Verona podcast on human rights. And thank you again for your participation.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.